Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. Perfect. Okay, we're about ready to start. Can you believe it? We're starting on time. There was an update to OBS, so hopefully that update will fix the problem. Hopefully that update did fix the problem, whatever the problem was. I don't know what it was, but there was an update, and so my camera's showing up easier. Also, one other thing, it's coming through on YouTube immediately rather than 2 days later, because that's what it's been doing. So I guess they fixed whatever problem was there. One thing I'll say to you guys right now, that on my Patreon, there is a Q&A through Theology in a Year chat. So that's the place to go if you want to ask questions about the sessions as we're going through them. Because as I told you, we are going to have Fridays as the question answer time. So that we can kind of at least have some type of interaction on this. So that's where you go. Go to my Patreon. You do have to be a Patreon to do this. So, and you can get, the cheap version of Patreon for $3 a month and ask questions, and then I'll answer them. As long as there's not too many, I will answer them. But last time we had just the right amount, and we got through them all. So today we are getting ready to start. Let's see here. What time is it? It is start time. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Test. Is that too loud? That looks like it's pushing too hard. I'm going down some. I probably shouldn't, but better down than way too high because I can't remove. I can turn it up, but I can't really turn it down very well. All right, let's try this. Testing. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. A little bit more. Now I'm going to listen to myself, so there'll be some feedback. Don't worry about it. Testing 1 2. I'm not even coming through at all. That I can see. Is my sound going somewhere else? Hold on. Okay. Testing 1 2. Okay, there we go. Good. We are set. We're ready. Let's go. Need to get in the camera. Welcome to Through Theology in a Year. Wait a minute. Started too quickly. Welcome to Through Theology in a Year. I'm Michael Patton, and I'm going to be leading you through all year long the entirety of systematic theology, just like you're going through a systematic theology textbook, but maybe even more detailed because we're having interaction. We're having fun with this, and who can have fun just sitting down and reading from cover to cover Wayne Grudem's systematic theology, although I could. Some of us can, but we're trying to make it more fun. We're trying to make it different. This is a way for me to make theology accessible. That is what I do. That is my ministry. We are on the 35th session, so you're behind 35 if you're just now joining us today, but that's okay because each session can stand on its own. But I would love for you to go back and see the sessions beforehand because they're very important, especially with this class. This particular section that we're in called Prolegomena, the things that we have, the prologue to theology, the things that we have to do before we even get into theological matters, it's the most important because we've got to be on the same page. We've got to define our terms. And every conversation, every discussion, everything you have with other people assumes that you guys are speaking the same language, that you're defining your terms the same. And in theology, if you do not, you can't assume that everybody understands and approaches things the same way. And so you got to understand the multiplicity of ways that people approach it and how to find out, how to navigate through this. And this is Prolegomena. This is what we've been going through this entire time, and we're going to spend a lot more time on it before we move in to bibliology and hermeneutics, which is the next section. But I encourage you to go back, but like I said, these are all standalone, and I'm very glad you are here. Now, one thing you can do is maybe you can't. Let me move this. You can support the ministry. You can support what I'm doing. Support me. This is the best way by going to patreon.com/C Michael Patton. Whenever you're there, if you wanted to give a tax-deductible donation, there is something pinned to the top that is open to everybody where you can see where to give a tax-deductible donation. But become a member. That's what I would all call on you to do. And even if you don't become a member, subscribe over there. Okay, enough of that. Let us begin. Let's see here. PowerPoint. Where's PowerPoint? PowerPoint only. Let's get over to our session. We got so much to do today. I mean, we really do. We're going to be talking about the development of maximalism. That's kind of sometimes I name it something, and then sometimes I might change it based upon how far we go. But we got a whole lot to talk about because there's just big ideas here and a lot of history that I need to cover in a short amount of time. Those of you who hate history, trust me, you're going to love this. I really think you will. This is not just boring old history. Whenever it comes to theology and the development of theology and how theology develops, you're going to love this. I promise, okay? So just hang with me. This is very historical, but at the same time, we're going to cover a lot of other stuff. Let me get rid of that. Okay, let's see here. Go back to the PowerPoint. I'm going to give you a few quotes here. Of course, this is a quote that we are going to use very often, and we're actually going to research to go through the history of, but in essentials, unity, and non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, charity. That is often called an evangelical creed. That is what evangelicalism is at least supposed to be about. I'm not saying it's always like that, but it's just a great ideal to strive for. Okay, a few quotes here from some big names in history that, create the precursors to what we are talking about, how we are talking here. This is Francis Turretin. He's one of my favorite theologians in the world. He says, not everything that belongs to the aptitude or the breadth of the faith must therefore belong to its necessity. All truths are not of the same weight. Some have greater, others have lesser degree of necessity. Now, that's a guy that was writing 300 years ago, and he was recognizing this. He was recognizing what we're talking about here. There's a difference between the essentials and the non-essentials of the Christian faith. John Wesley said this, and John Wesley was a great ecumenical person. He lived this. Though we cannot think alike, we may not love alike. May we not love alike. May we not be of one heart, though we are not of one opinion. And I think this is just a call of the church. Now, we can take this too far, as we'll see in a little bit, but at the same time, John Wesley saw the need for us to unite around those things that we all agree about. Here's John R.W. Stott. He says, while holding a good conscience, whatever our particular understanding of the evangelical faith may be, is it not possible for us to acknowledge that what unites us as evangelical people is much greater than what divides us? He was a great leader in evangelicalism. He was, he died not too long ago, but he was a great representative, a great European representative of evangelicalism. Even R.C. Sproul, the Calvinist, the hardcore Calvinist, was very, very gracious whenever it came to other positions. He said the central truths of the gospel must never be negotiated or compromised, but in secondary matters, there is room for dialogue and diversity. And, R.C. Sproul's, I cut my teeth on R.C. Sproul. He's really, really a great theologian. No matter whether you agree with his theology, his particulars, he was a great theologian. And he died very recently. J.I. Packer says, the purpose of theology is to deepen our knowledge of God and his ways, not to foster dissension over secondary matters. So, he saw that there were secondary matters. That's important to realize. Each one of these, the reason why I'm putting them up is because they understand the difference between essentials and non-essentials. And he just died recently as well. Last one here is from Alistair McGrath. The core doctrines of Christianity should be seen as those that are essential for salvation and the identity of the faith. Other doctrines, while important, do not have the same central significance. Sorry about that. I've got something in front of my screen right here whenever I'm reading. I need to correct that. But anyway, all of those are really, really good quotes. But here's one quote that I like, and I've seen it in various sources, but nobody knows where it came from, but I'm going to use it anyway. It says, there's no doctrine that a fundamentalist won't fight for, and no doctrine that a liberal will fight for. Isn't that great? It really shows the difference. It shows that there's polarities on this issue. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to look at how those arose and where they came from. We're going to talk about doctrinal maximalism, doctrinal minimalism, historic essentialism, and modern consentialism. Okay, those are, just hang with me on that. Doctrinal maximalism is where you believe every doctrine has to be, like you include every doctrine there is in your statement of faith and say you have to believe this no matter what. Doctrinal minimalism is basically the opposite of that, where you say we don't really have any creed. We don't have any statement of faith. Our statement of faith is love. So you've got the fundamentalists and you've got the liberals represented here. Then you have a modern consentialism. Modern consentialism is kind of a movement where you come in and you say, hey, let's just take whatever everybody agrees upon. Let's get a consensus. Let's take a tally in the church today as the church exists today, and find out what everybody believes the same, and then that will be our central doctrine. That will be what we all unite around. And that's problematic because you're always going to bow to the least common denominator. And the least common denominator is doctrinal minimalism. So modern consentialism, while represented in various places in the church today, you see it, such as the Emergent church that came and kind of went, but at the same time, this is what they did. That is basically a concession to liberalism. And then you got historical essentialism. That's where you say what has always been believed everywhere and by all. And we'll talk about that phrase a lot later on. But those are the different approaches we have when we're talking about essentials and non-essentials. Those are the different options that we have. Okay, let's see here. I want to talk about just kind of viewpoints, how you can view the church. This is just another kind of almost as an aside, but I think you'll see very much its relevance, but it kind of, I just want to show you an illustration that I was told that really helped me a while back to understand the difference of why we do these things, how we do these things. Now, whenever you're approaching theology, you can approach it with an anchor or boundaries of the Christian faith. Anchor or boundaries. If you have the anchor or the boundaries, you're drawing all the places that people can't pass. It's like, just like this circle here. You've got a circle and you've put boundaries up all around the circle, and you've got tons and tons of boundaries. And you say, hey, listen, this is the playground in the middle, but on the outside, you don't go. You cannot pass these. So don't swim past the buoys. These are all the buoys that you put in there, and you have freedom to swim everywhere else. Then you've also got and you might look at that and say, hey, that's a good idea. Let's just kind of see where nobody passes. Let's say what the furthest anybody can go is before we say, listen, you're outside the church. Listen, you're not a Christian. Listen, you don't represent the historic Christian faith any longer. Or listen, you are a heretic. That type of stuff. That is where the boundaries are. Now, you can also take it as a center. So that was boundaries. This is a center. And in this viewpoint, what you do is you say, I have a center that's anchored, an anchored center. And I have the most important thing in the center, and that gives me an anchor. Therefore, I have freedom as the anchor lets me go. As far as the anchor lets me go, I can float around. So it's a very different approach. It kind of, in some ways, produces a very similar result, but it's a different approach because it's a mindset. It's saying, what is the center to our faith? What is the most important thing? And then once we hold on to that most important thing, all the other things will kind of take care of themselves. Okay? It's a more dangerous approach for sure, because it's easier to create the boundaries than to say this is where you cannot pass. The center basically says, as long as you believe this, here's the center of the Christian faith, we'll let you go otherwise. Okay, now, what is the difference we're going to be talking about today between fundamentalism, liberalism, and evangelicalism? This is very important for our study today. By the end of our study today, I want you to know what an evangelical is. I want you to understand what an evangelical is. I want you to understand very deeply what a fundamentalist is and how it relates to all of this we're talking about, and why this is so important for the prolegomena of our theology. The prolegomena of our theology basically looks at whenever we're looking at these three, what we're doing is we're saying, this impacts us before we do anything else. This is part of seeing the big theological playing field, both in a contemporary way and a historic way. So that is the reason why I'm going through this. Now I want to talk about the emergence of sectarian divisions. The emergence of sectarian divisions. How did we get to where we are at? And how does it relate to everything I've said so far? Now, hang with me. Here's where we dive into history for a little bit, and it's going to be fun. It really is. I'm really excited about this. It's the first time it's not the first time I've done this or told this, but it's the first time I've really tried to get through it in this way, so I hope I can. Now, I want you to go back. Listen to this, okay? Go with me. Go back to the Israelites, the time before Christ. Let's go back to 700 years before Christ. 700 years before Christ, 722, you have the nation of Israel taken into captivity by Assyria because they did not follow God's law, and the consequences of Deuteronomy is that God was going to scatter them. In 586, the nation of Judah got taken by King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. So they're both taken. They're both have been dispersed. They have both been punished by God. Okay, so they don't have their nation anymore in the same way they had it before. But finally, they are released. We have those times, in the latter Old Testament, Esther and Nehemiah and the stories that go along with that. And God brings them back to the nation. He releases them from their bondage. And they come back, and think of it this way. Whenever they get back here, they're like, how would you view it? All right, I've been released from this prison. How do I not go back? That's kind of what they're thinking. What did we do wrong, and how do we prevent from this ever happening again? That's what they were thinking. Now, this was a group that got together. Think of it as they all come together after they're released from captivity, and they get into this kind of holy huddle, and they say, what went wrong? And each one of them says, we're never doing it again. This group was called a Hasidim, which means the pure ones. And this group was very devoted to making sure that Israel did not fail again. Now, at the very beginning, they basically did that. They were good at it. But eventually, here's what happened. You begin to have them break up into divisions. This little group does not agree forever. They do not stick together. And you have three divisions that come out of the Hasidim. You have this group that whenever the Greeks came into Israel and the Romans came into Israel, you had a group that said, hey, listen, Let's go ahead and just kind of join in with them. We don't have to hold on so tightly to all of that we believe. Let's join in. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, and that's kind of what they did. They were compromisers. They were those who were ready to compromise a little bit, just enough to satiate the Romans while they were in Israel. They didn't like it, but at the same time, hey, the Romans brought a lot of great stuff, and let's just join in with them and how they do things, and that way we will be able to get political power, and that way we will have influence, and so that's the best way. So you had one group that kind of compromised, another group that said, listen, guys, I'm getting out of Israel, because we've got we've got the Romans in Israel, and if they are here, they have corrupted everything. And even the temple itself has been corrupted by these guys. So we're getting out of town. We're getting out of town because we cannot take this. We are separating completely. So you have the separationists. And I'll tell you who all these are in just a minute. It's going to be very interesting to you. And then you have the ones in the middle that kind of said, listen, we're going to stay here, but we're going to make sure we keep everybody straight. We're going to make sure that nobody fails. We're going to make sure that we carry on what was the original purpose of the Hasidim. And in that purpose, we are going to build a wall around our faith, kind of like that border that I showed you earlier. We're going to build a wall around it and make sure while in Rome, while Romans are here, while we are under this influence, we're going to make sure nobody fails. Nobody breaks the law. Everybody does every aspect of the law completely and fully. Okay, that was another group. And so they were the preservers in the middle. So you have one group, the compromisers. Who do you think those are in Jesus' day? If you've read the New Testament, you may know what I'm talking about. There were three groups in Jesus' day that were represented here. Number one, you have the Sadducees. Which ones were they? The Sadducees were the compromisers. They were ready to give up. They didn't hold to everything that the Pharisees held to and the Essenes held to. They compromised a lot of stuff, including they didn't even believe in the resurrection of the dead. They only believed in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and they interpreted it differently. So you had this group called the Sadducees. You had a group called the Essenes, which aren't really talked about in the New Testament, but the Essenes, they moved out to the Dead Sea. That's where we get the Dead Sea Scrolls from, these Essenes. But they got out of town. Whenever the Romans were there, they got out, and they created their own community. They were complete separationists, the Essenes. And then you had this group that was building the wall around the law. And this group is very important because these are the Pharisees. The Pharisees said, we are going to preserve, but in our preservation, we're going to make sure we build a massive wall, a massive border around our faith so that nobody can cross. And every law will have a border. And those borders got tighter and tighter and tighter. So much so that whenever Christ came on the scene, you couldn't even really see the gospel anymore, the truth of God in that day. You couldn't see what God wanted because you had all of these peripheral issues that were built up to protect the law. And so what I'm trying to show here is a division early on with the very liberal and the conservative and the hyper-conservative, the liberal and the conservative, or better put, let's put it this way, the very liberal and the fundamentalists. The very liberal were the Essenes, or the Sadducees, and you had the fundamentalists who were the Pharisees. And in comes Christ, and what does he do? Christ serves as this via media, this middle way, this third way. And Christ came in and said, listen, the Pharisees are right about a lot of their doctrine, so he shut down the Sadducees. But they don't practice it well. They've got the right beliefs, but at the same time, they are focusing on the wrong things. They're focusing on their wall around these beliefs. And so Christ broke it up, and he kind of served as this middle way that said, listen, you guys got to be more accepting of other people, while at the same time keeping the law. Focus on the bigger things of the law, like mercy and justice. And you can reach out to people like this, people who are hurt, people who are in need, people who were destitute, even sinners, tax gatherers and sinners. You need to fulfill your purpose of reaching out to people and sharing them the love of God. That's how Christ was. He was in the center. He agreed theologically with the Pharisees on most things, but at the same time, he showed not a compromise, but a true display of the love of God as he is walking this third way. He didn't compromise, so he wasn't the Sadducees. So he's right in the middle, and that's why neither one of them liked him. Neither one of them liked him because they needed extreme one way or extreme another. So you have Christ that comes in and presents this third way. And then after Christ comes and the New Testament is written and you have the early church, you have the same situation arise. You have at very beginning, you have the church coming together and writing creeds and saying, here's what we believe. Here's the essentials of what we believe. And they wrote the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, both of which could fit on half a page, right? If I were to print those off, I could show them to you, and it'd be half a page long. And so that was very good, because what we did at the very beginning was we said, what are the essentials? What are the essentials of the faith? But then what happened? The same thing that always happens. We begin to build a wall around that. We begin to have all these questions that people bring up, and we have to have answers to them. But not only do we have answers to them, we have dogmatic answers to them. And so the creeds that started small, you have the Nicene Creed, the Creed of Chalcedon, both of those I agree with. They are very, very good creeds. Very, very short, giving the essence of the faith very early on in church history. But while evangelicals, as you and I, if you're an evangelical, you believe in the first two creeds, did you know that the Eastern Orthodox Church believes in 7 creeds? There were 7 ecumenical councils that were accepted by the entirety of the church at that time. But then the church broke up, and you have even more councils going in the Western world. You have the Roman Catholic Church, that it became the institutionalized church, continuing to have council after council after council. And that little half a page paper started getting thicker and thicker and thicker. Here's all the things you have to believe. Here's the wall we're building around our faith in order to protect it. Yeah, we had the essentials beforehand, but we're going to add to that. We're going to add answers to every question, including how the body and blood of Christ become Christ. I mean, how bread and wine become Christ. That's transubstantiation. That happened in the 13th century. You have that council getting together and establishing things. It just established more and more and more and more. And at the time of the 16th century, the reformers broke out. They said, enough. Again, here's the wall that has been built around the gospel. All of these traditions of men are here, and nobody can see the gospel anymore. So the reformers come in and do the same thing. They break it up, and they say, let's get back to the essentials. And they did, of course, at first. It was a good thing. They got back to the essentials. You had the Scripture alone, Christ alone, grace alone, and faith alone. Those were the main calling cards of the Reformation. But then slowly here comes liberalism, because you have the Enlightenment, remember? You have all this Enlightenment and this kind of anger at the institutionalized church, people going away from it. And then you have the Enlightenment. You have the rise of liberalism. Liberalism got stronger and stronger, to the point where you have this guy named Friedrich Schleiermacher around the 17th, 18th century come in, and he says, listen, guys, it's too much. Let's just let's just focus, because we don't believe those things anymore that we did believe. We got science, we got everything figured out on our own. Man figured it out. The Bible's not really true. I mean, we know that now because science tells us the Bible's not really true. People don't rise from the dead. Snakes don't talk. Donkeys don't talk. Those kind of things. And so they said, but here's what Friedrich Schleiermacher said, but we want to preserve Christianity. We still want to be called Christian. And so let's just unite around love. We can compromise the rest, but as long as we don't compromise love. And you have this kind of no creed but love, no creed but acceptance. And that was the liberalism church of the day that came up and grew in power into the 19th, 20th centuries. And then, and we're almost done here, we come to the 20th century. And what happens? Well, you have the fundamentalists. And the fundamentalists, let me tell you this, were not fundamentalists in our current definition at first. In the 1920s, you have a group of guys come together and say, listen, the church is compromising everywhere. You notice how it's going back and forth, back and forth. The church is compromising everywhere. And they said, we have got to come up with the fundamentals of the faith. So it's basically like writing a new creed. But let's make that creed short. And so they came up with the fundamentals that they published in the 1920s, the fundamentals of the faith, which became the fundamentalist, right? Now, you had Scopes monkey trial happen right at that time as well, and that was a big deal, and that's the only reason I mention it, because you have the fundamentalists who believe the Bible, believe in creation, are holding to the essentials that they laid out. You have a situation where evolution is being taught in school, and you have a crafty lawyer who doesn't want evolution taught in school. And you have another lawyer, Clarence Darrow versus William Jennings Bryant. Clarence Darrow was the crafty lawyer, and he was the liberal. He represented it. And William Jennings Bryant represented the fundamentalist of the day. And the fundamentalists just got wrecked. I mean, they did in court. It was a live court. It was broadcast everywhere. You can look up the transcript for the Scopes monkey trial and read through it. I've done that. And it's very interesting. But anyway, you have a situation where William Jennings Bryant was kind of tricked. He was put on stand. The lawyer was put on stand himself during this time. The lawyer that was fighting against evolution being put in schools. And whatever you believe about that doesn't matter. I just want you to know the history. William Jennings Bryant was fighting against this, because there was a man who taught evolution in the schools, and he was in trouble, big trouble. And so he was taken to court, and he was defended by Clarence Darrow. And what Clarence Darrow did was a very tricky thing. He got William Jennings Bryan on the stand, the other lawyer, and asked him, grilled him question after question. Do you believe, that a snake talked in the garden? Do you believe that a man can live for 3 days in the belly of a well? And this is all kind of on public television or public radio, and everybody's listening to it, and there's kind of questioning, that sounds kind of weird, what he's saying, yes. And William Jennings Bryant only did this because he was going to grill Clarence Darrow the next day. He said, as long as you let me put you on the stand, then I'll do it. And so he was going to do the same thing to him. So you believe we came from monkeys. You believe just the ridiculousness of each side. It's a caricature that they wanted to present of each side. And they were pretty excited because the public would see it. And so the caricature of the Christian faith was put on public. And then what happened that day was really, really funny. You had Clarence Darrow say, after he grilled William Jennings Bryan on the stand, he went up to the judge and said, we want to change our plea to guilty. So he paid, $50 or $100 to the court. And I think the ACLU paid it. But he paid $100 to the court, and the fine was given against the teacher. And he didn't have to get on the stand the next day. But a public perception, in the court of public perception, Clarence Darrow killed it. because he never had to get on the stand, and people never had to listen to his caricature, because William Jennings Bryan was prepared for it. So what happened? Why do I put that up there? Because it really did make an effect upon what the fundamentalist movement was of the day, and they became more and more isolated. The fundamentalists of the 1920s became more and more isolated, to the point where they started their own schools, started their own, institutions, started their own universities, did everything on their own, kind of on the side, because everything else was going liberal. Instead of staying within the world, they said, let's just separate from the world. And that's what they did. They separated from the world until eventually they had a creed like the Pharisees. They built a wall around everything, and basically whatever the world does, that's what's wrong. So if you can't go to movies, you can't dance, you can't smoke, you can't anything that the world does, that's automatic sin. So that's where fundamentalism became. It became what it was, where it started something more pure. Then last turn, and then we're gonna finish this up for today. But the last turn was this. You had let's use Billy Graham, because Billy Graham's a great example. I think he's the kind of figurehead for evangelicalism. But in 1950, Billy Graham, who was a great preacher already, and was well known, he was asked by the World Council of Churches in New York to come speak to them. Now, the World Council of Churches was a very, very liberal council of churches that the fundamentalists were they were completely against. So you had the two sides over here, and then you had Billy Graham, this new preacher, and he was changing lives. He was preaching the gospel. He was going to stadium after stadium, and fundamentalists, though, they were looking at him saying, "Well, what's he going to say? He better say he won't go. He better not go talk and identify with all those liberals, because if he does, we are kicking him out symbolically of fundamentalism. He won't be a part of us." And he did. He went and preached. It was a big event. He went and preached at the World Council of Churches in 1950 in New York. And he said, I'm going to try to quote him the best I can. He said, "I intend to preach everywhere and anywhere to whomever, as long as they do not hinder what I have to say." And so he basically said, I don't care about you guys. I care about saving those guys. And so once again, you had this kind of center. Okay, you had the two extremes, and you had the center being created. And this center is known, you had some scholars behind it, like Carl F. Henry, but this center is known as evangelicalism. That's where evangelicalism, modern evangelicalism, started. So evangelicalism started as a very straight, pure, let's just get back to the essentials again. And so we're going throughout church history. Notice this. It's so important for you to understand whenever we're looking at theology. There's always these extremes we're playing with. There's always this back and forth, middle, back, forth, middle. There's always this Hegelian dialect, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. But really, it's not a Hegelian. It's a little bit different, but it's a good illustration, because we're trying to find this middle way all the time, but we don't stay in the middle way. Why is it so hard for us whenever we have a doctrine and whenever we have these beliefs and we settle on some, not to stay where we are at? Why can't we walk this tightrope in the middle, this via media, this middle way that we're always trying to find? Now, that's the history of it. Now, I want you to go and I want you to look with me at some of these charts, because they're very important for understanding, once again, what it is I've taught just now. Okay, so now you've got, here's the circle. Remember the circles we have, and the circles I've been talking about, the concentric circles. This is my drawing of it. It's the best I could do. And I don't know why I wanted to draw it instead of put it out on Photoshop and create it like I usually do. But here's the drawing. And you have it representing liberalism. Notice, remember, the further you get in the middle, the more important a doctrine is. And the further you get to the outside, the less important a doctrine is. And so all these dots represent doctrines. Liberalism has tons and tons of dots in those things that don't matter. Basically, every doctrine doesn't really matter that much. It's negotiable. It's not important. So liberalism is represented by putting all the doctrines in this place of not important. And right in the middle, maybe they have the doctrine of love. That's the main one they stick with. Then you have fundamentalism, who does just the opposite. Everything is in the middle. It's like, if you believe it, you put it in the most important place. If God said it, it is important no matter what. No matter what anybody says, it is the same degree of importance. And maybe they might have a few things out, because you always have to have a few things out on the outer edges, but that's fundamentalism. And this is what evangelicalism has tried to look like. This is what the center looks like. This is whenever you have the via media, the middle way. And this is where you have the core doctrines in the middle, and you have thought through where all the other doctrines go, where they are supposed to be placed in this, and you try to keep them there. There's a gravitation to the center or to the middle. There always is. And that's part of the tightrope we have to go into. And you may be somebody who just believes like the Pharisees, or like the fundamentalists who have everything in the center. And if you want to keep on going that way, I understand why, with the history of what you're doing. You can stay there, of course. But this is something that we are not going to do. We are going to balance. We are going to try our very best to try to understand, as we move through all of theology, where everything gets placed, and it will be in different places. There will be a variety. It will look much more like this than like this. Okay, let's see here. So then you've got the... Well, that's it for today. We've covered a lot. Yes, we have covered a lot. I didn't even look at the clock once. So thank you for sticking with us all this time. I hope this has been beneficial to you. Now, one thing you have, I've told you before, that this PowerPoint that I'm making, I'm going to make it available to everybody on Patreon, and you can get it once it's done, but you can get it at any time. Like, if you wanted it now, you go over to Patreon, and once you're a member, or I think even if you're not a member, you could subscribe and send me a message, and I'll send you what I have. I've got notes at the bottom, which basically tell the same stories and go through everything for the most part. There's not always notes, but these videos can serve as notes as well. And I'd love for you to teach this same stuff to other people, because I think it's the most important stuff in the world. So I make that available. Also, don't forget, there's Patreon. That's where you support from. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you, all my patrons. You make this possible. So we've got big plans too. We really do. I mean, there's so much stuff that I want to do around this, around exactly what we're doing here, just because I think it is the greatest thing in the world. I think this theology, I love theology. I love understanding it. I love people's eyes whenever they finally get it. That maybe they didn't even change their belief, but they finally get why they believe what they believe and how to believe better. I love helping people through doubt, and this stuff helps so much, especially this part where we're distinguishing between essentials and non-essentials. Anyway, thank you all so much for showing up, and we will see